Superhero showers.
Great. Welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. And today on Creative Economy and Outdoor Recreation Celebration Day, we're going to pivot to the creative economy, and which represents a significant percent of our economy, which we're ever
I was like, because it's one of those
ever more appreciating. And we have I think with a lot of new people are in the room. So I would love to have us introduce ourselves, and then we'll start with Susan.
Sure.
I'm Tom Chittenden. I represent the Southeast quadrant of Chittenden County.
Hey, Sharon Hinsdale, same district. I'll give this to my kids.
Who may or may not be ready to deal with it yet.
It is eating size. I apologize.
Yeah. Allison Clarkson, Winter County District.
Smart.
Randy Brock, Franklin County and Northern Grand Isle County, and I also was co-chair of the film commission, the film task force.
Yes.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, Rutland Council.
Good to see you. And I'm Susan Evans McClure. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Arts Council. Thank you. Should I
think you go. I just want to know, because we talked about it yesterday when we came in to see the new additions, because we are wanting to amplify the work of the creative economy and support our artists in the state. So we have now in Senate Economic Development and in Senate GovOps works that are available for sale by our Vermont artists. And I think is Amy going to join us and talk? We're going to have a moment when we have the artists come together with Amy or you.
Yeah, that might probably not today.
And once we have finished hanging all the pieces that are going to be in this room, because we aren't finished yet. And Carrie has just put one of her paintings up here.
It's really nice.
Carrie, it's full over there. But it's a great theme that fits into our work. So I would love to have you, Susan, take us away on the creative economy and its contributions to Vermont.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for having me today and giving us this chunk of time. It is Creative Economy Day. So there's going to be testimony in lots of different committees and a lot going on in the building. I'll start with the exciting part that at 3:30, there's going to be a reception in the Cedar Creek Room featuring some Circus Smirkus performers. So we hope that you'll join us for that. And I'm really happy to be joined today by my colleagues who will hear from in a bit. Jody Freed, who's the executive director of Catamount Arts, Alex Sharman, who is a filmmaker, and Terry Hill, whose art you are looking at right over there. Well, I'll turn it over to them in a few minutes. But I wanted to share a bit about the Arts Council and the role of the creative economy in our state. So the Arts Council is the state's arts agency. We're the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Arts, and our mission is to cultivate and advance the arts and creativity throughout the state. We're working to build a state where artists thrive, where creativity is at the heart of our communities, and where everyone has access to the arts in their lives and education. We work in a few different ways, primarily as grant makers. We invest state, federal, and private funding in directly to artists, communities, arts organizations, educators. We do a lot of convening and training. We bring together our sector to ensure that they can learn from each other. They know what resources are available to them, and they're learning. We know that our resources will never be able to fund all of the needs of the creative sector. So we do a lot of work ensuring that we're training folks so that they can do their best work beyond the scope of what we're able to fund. But we also do a lot of funding. So in FY24, the council awarded just over $3.2 million in grants to 131 individuals, 235 organizations and businesses in every county. I'll note that while that is for our organization an impressive number, it includes the end of our Creative Futures COVID relief funding, which we'll talk about in a sec. Over the past 5 years, we were only able to fund 45% of all of the applications we received. So there continues to be greater demand for these resources than we have capacity to support. But we're working every day to increase that amount. So grants go to fund artists to create new works or enhance their practice. We support communities with public art projects. We support educators with arts education in schools. And we also run 2 programs on behalf of the state, the Cultural Facilities Grant Program and the Art and State Buildings Program. Both of those are funded through the Capital Bill and are an important investment in public art and the infrastructure to support the arts across the state.
And have legislators serving on them I
Thank-
believe one of them has, I think Wendy is going to serve on the Art and State Building.
Oh, great. Okay.
I think Wendy Harrison, but I'm not sure that the person has been named for the cultural
Oh.
facilities.
Cultural facilities is in the past. It has been.
It is not at a
It is
legislative.
not.
Okay, fine.
But we do involve Vermont Historical Society and the Division for Historic Preservation
Right.
in those grants too. This in FY24, we also wrapped up the Creative Futures COVID relief funding, which was an unprecedented $9 million of ARPA funds that was invested in our state's creative sector. As many, COVID, we're like on to 3 crises past COVID now, but it is worth saying that COVID was so fundamentally earth-shattering to the creative sector. We were the first organizations to close, many of them the last to reopen, and that funding was absolutely vital in sustaining Vermont's creative economy and our businesses. We've gotten some final reports back from grantees on that recently, and the things that people are saying are really exactly what we wanted that program to do. Overwhelmingly, people saying this money was what allowed me to pay my taxes. This money allowed me to serve my customers. This money allowed me to grow the programming I was doing to serve the needs of students in my community. And many people saying that was the only reason they did not close was because of the state funding and federal funding. So thank you to everyone who made that possible. It does feel like a long time ago, but I think it's worth mentioning because it was such an important investment in the future of creativity in our state.
Well, it's the results of which we still have all those
Exactly.
organizations and artists functioning in their capacity.
Exactly. One of the main initiatives of the council is the Vermont Creative Network. We're bringing together today in the State House, which was established by the legislature in 2016. The Creative Network is a broad coalition of organizations, businesses, and individuals working to advance Vermont's creative sector. And what we know is that investing in art, culture, and creativity as essential infrastructure means we see a corresponding increase in our local economies and our state economy. And when we say creative sector, that is everything from architects, libraries, museums, artists, creative businesses, potters, any industry that has creativity at its center, writers, authors, we could go on and on because in Vermont, it really is everywhere. I also think I haven't done the math. I haven't fact checked this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we also have more legislators with creative practices than any other state in the country.
I think that
I understand that. That's awesome. So we also know that not only do the arts support our souls and our communities and as people, there's also some hard economic data to back up investing in the arts. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, the arts and culture contributed nearly $1.2 billion to Vermont's economy in 2022. That's 3% of the state's GSP and over 10,000 jobs.
Do we have no updated numbers on that for the last year and the year before?
No, we
Up to
get it from
23.
them. That's how they deliver it to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another research study that was done in 2022 is what's called the Arts and Economic Prosperity 6 survey. And, I think many of you can experience this, right? You go to a theater, you go see a show, you go out to dinner, you pay for parking, maybe you get a babysitter. There's some extra spending that goes along with that experience. And so this study, which was a national study, Vermont was a participant, was really important because it put some hard numbers on what is that spending that people are doing, right? The $1.2 billion of our economy, that's the production of the creatives who are working in the state. This spending that we're looking at is the spending that audiences spend. So there were 1.4 million attendees to nonprofit arts and culture events in 2022.
Which, remember, was low because we
it
were
was
still
coming out
bringing
of
people
COVID.
back
Exactly.
from
Mhm.
COVID.
Yes. And we found that they looked at where audiences were coming from. 75% of the audiences were local, which means they were from that county. They went to something in that county. 25% were non-local. So that means they were traveling from outside of the county. Could have been outside of the state. They didn't actually track that. But they found that local audiences are spending just under $30 on top of the price of their ticket, and non-local audiences are spending just over $50 on the top of the price of their ticket. We did a Burlington specific survey, and those numbers are drastically different. The non-local audiences was like $75. So this study is really helpful for us because it puts some hard numbers on what we know to be true, right? Like I went to a show in Burlington last week at Vermont Stage. It was great. A hilarious way to just take a break from life. A farce, a murder mystery farce. But I also went out to dinner. I also paid for parking. There's other spending that goes along with that as part of our entire economic system.
That's
Yeah, Brandon.
Do you do any statistical gathering of information based on things like film events that may be filmed here but shown in multiple places?
So we don't have specific sector data on audiences.
Mhm.
This audience data was really looking at all of the live arts and culture events.
So those are live events only that you're measuring.
Yes, and this does include, film screenings
Yeah,
and
this includes the showing of film.
yes.
Well, it may include the showing of films, but what a film made in Vermont or about Vermont may be shown anywhere in the world.
Mhm.
And do you gather any economic statistics as to what in fact comes back to Vermont as a result of it?
We do not do that. One of the things when we talk about film, there's an option when what we're proposing is developing a database of film
Mhm.
resources. And if we go with the database that our partners want to go with, there's an option to track some of that local economic impact data through the database. This wouldn't be, I think there's an intangible nature to the arts too that is worth talking about, that it's really hard to track. If you see a film, we were just talking about this. If you see Alex's film about Vermont and you live in Washington State, you see this film about Vermont, then you are thinking about where you want to go on vacation and your brain says, oh, I saw this film about Vermont. Then you make that decision. That's really hard to track with data. But we also know that does happen. And it's an important way for us to tell the stories of Vermont and bring people here too.
But on film, individual distributors can give you those
Absolutely.
numbers, individual filmmakers can tell you some of that. I mean, there is data.
And there's data, of course, in the report that was done
Mhm.
by the
Yeah, on the-
task force. I just wondered if you had found something new and innovative that we had at the
No.
time. Yeah, the group.
We've just watched your
Right.
presentation. Tons.
I really have a comment and a question. One, I don't know if you'd be able to speak to it, but on the previous slide that you had up regarding 3% of Vermont GSP, I'd be curious how that compares to other states. Are we more or less dominated, or is that a larger percentage share than some of our peers? But the other is a personal thing that I'll keep raising every time I can with audiences like this. I grew up in South Burlington and I saw a lot of shows at Memorial Auditorium, and it's been forlorn for the past few years. I'd love to know if you've looked at the economic decline or loss of revenues in that area. And I'd also welcome your group just advocating to the new University of Vermont president to build the Terrence Center, because this is a desert for large audience venues. We just have no place for Noah Kahn to come and play indoors when he wants to come back to Vermont. Right now, the last few tickets I bought were in Montreal and Boston and Spark. Flynn's just not big enough for
Yeah.
Noah Kahn. He's huge now. So I love the Flynn. I'll go for any excuse to go to the Flynn, but I just think Vermont needs a large
Yeah.
indoor venue to
We do.
host those bigger acts, which bring a ton of people to come here. I'm tired of going to Boston and Montreal to see the big shows.
So that is something that comes up a lot when we're talking about with our performing arts sector, is the need for the desiring need for that. I will say Vermont is really well positioned to be between those big cities right now. So we do often, and Jody maybe can speak to this outside of what you're going to talk about, but in your role too, that there are a lot of acts that are mid-sized acts that do play in Boston, play in Montreal, play in New York, and we're right in the middle. So that has been a strategy for a lot of our performing arts centers, is to try to attract those folks as they come through. I have talked to the folks at Higher Ground about this and some other people who are really interested in venues overall. I think it is definitely a driver of economic development. And one of the questions that I got from folks when we talk about this is, where does it go in the state? And where do you concentrate that economic?
Well,
That's why the Terrence Center, I mean, it's there. We just need to build it, and that could start to host some things.
so, yeah, I think, and we can certainly do this outdoors, as we have seen with several concerts, some of which have had pluses and minuses in terms of their impact on the land and the community. But we, once summer hits, we have outdoor venues, but we desperately need an indoor venue. And I would more to follow on that. I think that's something we could figure out how to champion in this committee. So,
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk about that. I think it's a good topic. And in a couple slides, I'm going to talk about some weather-related emergency relief that we've been doing, which I think is very closely related to this.
One of our adaptive partners is speaking, so I need to go. I think both of us, but we wanted to catch them. Thank you so much.
thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I will. I used these images of a circus performer balancing things because this is often what it's like to be a working artist and to be an artist who has a business. Vermont artists are small businesses, and we hear the need for business development training again and again. So I did want to mention that this past year, with funding from USDA Rural Development and the Arts Council, we were able to offer free access to business training workshops specifically designed for artists. It was through an organization called Assets for Artists. They're based in Western Massachusetts, but now they do trainings across New England. And what we found was that Vermont artists overwhelmingly took advantage of these. We had 76 artists participate, and these are really in-depth trainings, everything from how to build a website, branding, legal support, how do I incorporate my business. And one artist, we just got some really great feedback that I wanted to share. One said, I'm so used to having to figure out everything myself, and it was a relief to finally have some guidance. Another said, my band was about to launch a crowdfunding campaign, and we've been desperate for exactly this information. So I have found that there are actually a lot of supports for businesses in Vermont, for small businesses.
We have just been discussing it actually previous to your arrival in this committee.
And often the need is a communications need. It's like, how do we connect the people in every sector with the resources that exist? So we have been really leaning into that area. We're launching a new strategic plan in a few weeks, and that'll be a big piece of our work, is connecting to the things that already exist. Sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to ensure that artists feel like they can do it too.
Yes, Keisha.
Do you have demographic information?
So we have been trying to update we get our data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. We kind of went through that data sector by sector in 2018, and we've just been working with UVM's Office of Rural Partnerships with Leahy Center to update that data to sector out that data for the new 2022 data we have. They do not collect demographic information, and it's something we have been really advocating for doing more research on, because we know that we have anecdotal information. I know Michael Wait was just talking with you all.
Yeah.
We partner with Vermont Professionals of Color as a lot, because we really value making sure that everyone in Vermont has access to both the services and grants we offer, but everything that's available. We do not have demographic data, and it's something we would love to have, and have been asking partners to work on and trying to think about funding. It is challenging. It's challenging to fund data of research of any kind, really, is what we're finding. So we do not, but.
And by the way, just to plug, I'm leading an effort with the family of Lubenia Dorsey Bright to put the first portrait of a Black woman in the State House. And I really like to have an interactive component. So would David Sheets, for the record, so that people can talk about this is my vision right now, but people can talk about their experience in Vermont as people of color. And I wouldn't know where to turn. The Folk Life Center, you all, what do you suggest? Like, I think there's a lot of people who don't know what the external facing organization is for, thinking about our projects. And
interactive stuff too. I mean, that our museums know how to do those things well, and we actually, So I think that's a.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to. Well, I think so. There's Vermont Historical Society. I think would be a great partner for that. To think about it, they've done a lot of interactive work in their gallery that are leaning more in that direction as well. There's also some, great museum. Fleming Museum actually has, one current art who's going to be in here in this committee room in the next couple days. His show is at Fleming Museum now.
I guess what I would suggest is thinking about, similar to what Vermont Professionals of Color Network is doing, having resources about Black portraitists, artists that identify as people of color, people who do that interactive work. That is a challenge even for our museums and our institutions. So I just don't know who would take any responsibility for helping artists of color specifically to be in networks and to see grant opportunities.
Yeah, so we have
artists of color right on our walls.
Yeah, that's true. And we've been working a lot with the Clemens Family Farm and their Vermont African American and African Diaspora Artist Network, SPADAM. So we've been supporting them with some direct granting, and also really just understanding what communicating together too, and have had a lot of conversations with Lydia about co-creating how we're working together. So that is one of many organizations in the state doing this great work around this. So that would be a place that we have supported in the past as well, and will continue to because they're really wonderful partners. Actually, Julio, whose art is on the walls right now, is a member of the Vega Network also. I think you raise a really important point about training for public art and public history, really.
Yeah.
I think that is regionally, actually across America, that is something that is sorely lacking, is how we train the people who work in our public institutions to talk about the past in a way that is both compelling, real, and encourages us to do better in the future. That is actually, I will say from a very personal perspective, that's my background. So I'm happy to talk to you about it on the side. Because like I worked at the Smithsonian American History Museum for a long time. And I worked on our African American history programming and looking at the civil rights movement. So I just want to work on that with you anyway.
That's like, basically, that's kind of what I was asking. Any help. So.
I think that's a great continuation.
Yeah, it's a great story.
So back to our balancing act.
So the balancing act is just to talk about this training and business development and how we can continue. One of our priorities is to continue to do more of that and make sure that everyone has access to it.
But I will point out to our committee that the more people we funnel into the limited resources we have for supports, we need to support those resources. So our RDCs, our Vermont Legal Center, our Vermont Small Business Development Center, all those, if we're going to funnel more people to them, they need also more support.
Absolutely.
Okay, right.
I wanted to also mention our Vermont Arts Culture Disaster and Resilience Network. Great name, terrible acronym of VACR. Because as we have learned over the past few years, our response to emergencies and emergency preparedness is an economic issue. We have really leaned into this area of emergency response and emergency preparedness. We know it's going to continue to be more and more of an issue for the arts sector. We're co-leads of VACDARN with the Vermont State Archives and Records Administration and the Secretary of State's office. And VACDARN is working to build the strength and resilience of our vital cultural sector. We offer training, support, and direct assistance. And through this network, in response to multiple years of flooding now, and I will say this network was founded pre-COVID, because emergency preparedness is an area of focus for the art and culture
It
sector.
sort of came out of Irene, didn't it? Did it begin?
It was after Irene and before COVID. The magical sweet spot between those disasters. And I will say when the network was founded, I was not at the Arts Council, but I was at one of the original meetings, and global pandemic was not even on the list of crises that they were looking at. And a really important thing about the network is having someone from Vermont Emergency Management as part of the leadership team. And what VACDARN was able to do during the flooding was really deploy assistance direct to artists and organizations and provide immediate expertise for conservation for impacted materials, support the FEMA process, and really connect the sector to emergency management. We all know that after a crisis, what you do not want is every single artist in the state calling one by one to ask what they should do. So we are not emergency responders in any way, but we have become kind of a clearinghouse for the arts and culture sector to access resources and information. We also were able to deploy conservators to a lot of the really hard-hit collections, including the picture you see here, Vermont Studio Center in Johnson, their print collection, which has incredible artworks that were made in Vermont over the past 50 years, were flooded. So we were able to deploy conservators, many of whom live in Vermont and actually work outside of Vermont usually, but they're here. We were able to have them save those collections.
Yes, we had this at the Morrill Homestead.
Exactly. Yes, we did some work at Morrill Homestead. Makes sense. Yeah, I feel like this is for the rest of time. It's like my job is just telling museums to get your collections out of the basement. We're also now encouraging climate-focused projects as part of our existing grant program, specifically the Cultural Facilities Grant Program, and we've seen a tremendous increase in the requests related to climate resilient infrastructure projects. I'll also mention that our office is on State Street, 136 State Street, right across the street, where we've been since 1965. We're flooded in 2023. The building is still not open, and we are working with BGS to.
Where are you working out of it?
We about over the summer moved into BCFA's old building. It's College Hall up on the hill.
Oh, so up on the hill.
Yeah.
So what is the time frame when you're moving back into the Leahy house?
That is a TBD. They're still working. BGS is still working. There's FEMA issues of FEMA, unknown about how much FEMA funding there is. There's some major work that's going to need to be done on that building. And I think they're very smartly really looking at the whole Capitol complex and how that whole space needs to be kind of reworked, changed, rethought of forest, non-porous surfaces. Do we need a parking lot right on a floodplain?
Yeah.
Probably not. And really thinking of it all together. I think there's some real potential for that space as it is reopened to think about how to incorporate the arts and culture into how we think about those spaces, indoors and outdoors. We obviously are very committed to returning to that building. It's been our only home. It's gonna be our 60th birthday this year. For those who don't know, it was also Patrick Leahy's childhood home. So there's
Right,
also some
like
great.
it's lighthouse. I think.
Exactly.
We have another name.
Moved from Burlington, is that?
He grew up.
No,
It was where
grew up
Leahy.
here.
Yeah. where Leahy grew up.
Remember his story about riding his tricycle through the governor's office?
Well, he has a story about like the Italian markets in Burlington. So
Yeah, but he
mixed up.
grew up here. He and Mary grew up in that.
And my colleague Amy Cunningham did get to take a tour with Thunder Lady and Mary, and she thought it was like one of the best days of her life. Apparently, it was pretty. I will just mention how our budget works for the council. We are actually the only state. There's 56 state and territorial arts agencies. The National Endowment for the Arts gets their funding. They split it among the 40% of it goes to the 56 state and territorial arts agencies. We are the only one in the entire country that operates as an independent nonprofit. So we're one of the quasi-state agencies created in statute to act as the state's arts agency, but we operate independently. And still, we receive the majority of our funding from the state of Vermont and the NEA. Our NEA funding requires a dollar for dollar state match. And we do private fundraising on top of that. We're really careful not to compete with any of the organizations in our state. You know, there are limited dollars and we're different. And, you know, if anybody asks me, if anybody says, well, I'm thinking about donating to my local arts organization or the Arts Council, we always say, go to your local arts organization. The private funding we have done has been really focused at kind of larger donors who are really interested in making grants directly to artists, which they don't have the capacity to do, but we've been able to add funding into our existing grant programs.
So just given that you require a dollar for dollar match with NEA, what is your sense about how endangered the NEA is in this really frightening federal climate?
I will say we have received no information from the NEA. And I'm part of a national advocacy group that we just met yesterday, and we're really focused on ensuring that the NEA continues to exist in some form. And that is the most important thing, is to make sure that agency continues to exist. And we don't know what that's going to look like. And we want it to look the way it has looked for a while. During the first Trump administration, the NEA was relatively stable. It is a concern for sure that funding would decrease in some way or potentially go away completely. We really don't know. I will say for me, the focus has really made me think about the vital role that state funding has. You know, our focus forever on our funding has been, this is how much federal money we got. We come to the legislature and say, we need a dollar for dollar match. And that's been really, it's been really important, and it's helped get federal money to our state. It's kind of doubled the impact of that federal money. If that federal money decreases, there is still a tremendous need for the same level of support from the state, and potentially more need for that level of support because of the federal changes that are happening.
So given that, you're asking us for an additional $68,000.
So these numbers are based, and I have several called out to our friends, the NEA. These numbers are based on what they suggested to us before January, before January 20th. And this was based on their suggestion for, level of funding and what they knew they had in other pots, and that our amount for them would be almost $72,000. We're in the governor's budget at, I should know that amount that's written down. We're in the governor's budget for a little less than that, which the governor did put us in for a 3% increase over what we got last year. And then our conversations with them are always like, well, here's what we think we're going to get from the NEA. And they say, great, here's a 3% increase. If it's not enough, take it to the legislature. So we are waiting to hear from NEA on what our final amount is. And I will say, even if it is anticipated to decrease, I think it's really important for the state legislature to continue to fund us, at least at where we have been, because I think of
So does this $1,072,000 incorporate your additional ask of 68, or is it 68 on top of the $1,072,000?
this is the ask.
Okay,
This is the total.
so the $1,072,000 is the ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will say that we are obviously tracking very closely all of the federal changes, both that impact the NEA funding, but also that impact arts and culture organizations who receive federal funding from other agencies. Some of that continues to be frozen. Some of that was ARPA money. Some of that is USDA money. And that is anxiety provoking to say the least. A lot of these are grants that have been signed, work that is underway, and it is unclear if reimbursements are going to happen on some of those grants right now. It's caused a tremendous amount of upheaval for so many people in so many sectors, and the arts and culture are included in that too.
Yeah, Keisha.
I mean, I'm just reading headlines at this point, but it feels like it's more than a funding question. It's a question of creative freedom
Yes.
as well.
Sure.
The Kennedy Center comes to mind, just do you like, I think we still need to be thinking about where we draw a line and where we are willing to fund certain things ourselves if the federal government conditions aid in ways that don't align with our values. And I don't know if you're part of those national conversations, because hearing like we just want it to continue, I get that. But, I think we all worry for the next short while, what rate we might be asked to give up.
Yeah. Well, so the only thing we have seen, which is public, right? The NEA changed some of their direct grant programs. They got rid of a grant program that was creates arts experiences for underserved communities. They got rid of that. They changed up one of their other grant programs, and they have on their website some restrictive language that you have to agree to if you take the money. I stand firmly that these are all words on paper until they are legal, and many of them probably are not.
What
So,
sort of restrictive changes have you actually seen?
so the NEA new grant language on their website says that if you accept the money, you have to comply with all of these. It actually just says all of the executive orders, and it says that you cannot
Oh, man.
offer any DEI training at your organization. And this is outside of what you do with the funding.
Mhm.
Yeah, paper straws.
They didn't go that far. I mean, maybe if it's one of the executive orders, right? Like,
Does this
Yeah.
bill have any intent to deal with monies that you have already received are in the process of spending, as opposed to new programs such as the 26 budget?
so that is what's the
$1,000,000 question here.
Yeah, we don't know. We haven't heard anything about that. I mean, I have to imagine that if they retroactively change a signed grant agreement, I mean, we already have
Yeah.
that money, like, there's gonna be legal till the end of time.
Right.
But I think for our sector nationally, what we really have to be focused on is supporting the NEA to continue, to have it continue to exist so that we can, it's much harder to build back from.
Right.
We don't want to. But on the other hand, we also need to have strong federal advocates who are willing to sue the federal government to make sure that the rules we are following are actually legal. A lot of what we're hearing right now are designed and intended to scare us as a sector, as a nation, as an international
Do you have
community.
counsel, for example?
We have counsel who, and he is wonderful. He's mainly focused on HR law. So that is some of the conversations that I feel grateful to be part of, or those national conversations, and also looking at how this doesn't just apply to us, right? Like if this language is in the NEA grant agreement, it's going to show up in other agencies. And is that a fight that's better fought collectively? Maybe, yeah.
And sort of tag on to Randy's question, I think maybe you always have access as a quasi-state agency to have Attorney General.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
I think the good defense is good offense.
Yeah.
And maybe time to have
And maybe also
initial
time to
conversation.
have at least some contingency planning.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So given our time is
Because
getting,
these other cuts that you see elsewhere with zero notice
yeah,
and have an immediate impact. So it's just something that I think would be
Yeah.
enacted.
Yeah.
so maybe time for a meeting with Charity.
Yeah.
And at our time, I know we have three other people that we're going to hear from. So
So I am going to transition to talking about film. Talking about film, and then I'm going to hand it over to Alex to talk.
which is part of your ask for this year,
Yeah, if you did.
in addition to the money.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So in 2022, the legislature convened the Vermont Film and Media Industry Task Force. A big thank you to Senator Brock for being co-chairing that. working group that was tasked with researching and reporting on the history of Vermont's efforts to cultivate the film industry and making recommendations for the future. The task force submitted their report in January of 2023, and I think they summed it up best by saying that Vermont's film industry requires a uniquely Vermont-based approach. Film and creative media are a vital and growing segment of all of the creative economy data I just told you, and a crucial industry for Vermont businesses, not just for filmmakers, but also for small businesses. Small businesses in Vermont need digital services, need digital media to thrive in the digital world that we live in. Film and creative media are not just large movie productions. We love those, but they're also digital storytelling that all small businesses need. And we need to have a homegrown industry to be able to support that for our small businesses. We're one of only a handful of states nationwide that offer no funding to support the film and creative media industry. And
we did, but we no longer do.
And there have been several iterations of trying to figure out what is the right thing to do in Vermont.
The demise of the Vermont Film Commission.
Yeah. There are also some really amazing higher education institutions and technical schools that are training film and media professionals here. We also really want them to stay here when they graduate. And what we are hearing from them is that they don't feel like they have access to the opportunities here that they have in some other states. We also know that our state is not positioned to have the same level of tax incentives that our neighboring states do for film production. We are also not advocating that we should. It's not right for Vermont. We won't be competitive. We are actually directly between Quebec, New York, and Massachusetts that have some of the highest tax credit for film in the country and internationally. But what we know is that we have people who are working here, who want to work here, who are trained here, and our focus instead, we believe, is just on giving them that little push to make it just a little bit easier to work here. And we know that when we do that, that will increase the number of jobs in the industry. It'll create more tax revenue related to film and filmmaking and create opportunities for these graduates to stay. So what we are advocating for is the creation of a Vermont Film and Creative Media Workforce Development Initiative that would do three things. The first is build and sustain a database of film and creative media assets. That means right now, if you're a filmmaker and you are working on a project, and you think, gosh, I need to rent a piece of equipment. Where do I go? You just basically have to call everyone you've ever met, Google, like, where you can talk to this person. What we want to do is centralize those resources, just make it easier to know what's already there. I had a great conversation this morning with the folks from Vermont Access Network, I think Dan too, about including their resources in there. They're building these incredible resources across the state that are available for rent, but like nobody knows about them. It's kind of all the same problem, right? Like we have amazing assets and resources, but having the tools to communicate about them. We also want to have a person to answer the phone. So most other states who have a film office, they have the go-to film person. So when somebody wants to film in New York, Rhode Island, wherever, they call a person and they probably don't call, they start with an email. But eventually they'll be put in touch with a person who knows the scene and knows who to put them in touch with, can explain how to use the database. And then the third piece that we want to look at is really spending some time looking at what should production incentives look like here. Is a database, we believe, is like kind of the first step, this data, that making it a little bit easier, but is there a Vermont focused model that can really help us build for which is primarily a non-extractive industry that can happen here, right? I really think that Vermont can be and should be thinking of film here as what is the film industry going to look like in 20, 30 years, which is really different than it looked like even 5 years ago. And we're really well positioned to be setting up our film and media economy right now to be the center of that for the future. But we need to be thinking about how to support that and how to build that base now to get there. So we know that we're never going to compete with New York, Massachusetts,
Quebec. Actually,
Vancouver.
big elephant room is Quebec.
But we also know that you got to start somewhere, right? And our request, which is a small request of $120,000, is to invest to create these things for the first year and be able to have some real data on how much they're used, what the impact is, and where we build after that.
I think it's very much in line with kinds of findings that were in the report of the Film and Industry Task Force, which is I think interesting. And it points out that we are, last time I looked, we were one of only 3 states that did not have such an office currently in the United States. We also noticed that when we advertised, if we announced the task force and asked if anyone would come to one of two sessions that we held, we were overwhelmed by the number of people. Several hundred people attended each one of these sessions. The interest was
Huge.
We also noticed that Vermont has courses in film and industry throughout various educational institutions. And we have the institutions that are providing the training and then no place to use it inside Vermont. And that was a missed opportunity. And we also found there were a substantially large number of people who are engaged in some part of the industry, doing much of their work elsewhere, but living in Vermont and not having the opportunity in Vermont that they have in other states. So it suggested a strong opportunity. And then we also, I think many of us who were involved got sick of seeing Moonlight in Vermont, filmed in Vancouver.
Yeah, exactly. But to tag on to what you just said, there are also ancillary businesses that would be incredible if we made ourselves the editing capital of the Northeast. I mean, we have one of our former legislators' husband has an amazing facility in Southern Vermont, where it's mostly music, but where studios that enable this, editing studios that would enable this and make it affordable. Most people go to New York or to, well, Alex could probably speak to this, or to Boston, maybe to Montreal to edit their films. But there are lots of ancillary things that we could be doing also to support. We have CTE programs focused on media and film. So we just need to build apprenticeships and internships and build the workforce, and then also create other earning opportunities. So Keisha, because I know we have 3 other witnesses.
The real talent you want to hear about. The bureaucrat.
But Keisha,
Well, kind of a similar, like in the absence of some of these functions being, clear to people, like did someone in the state ask Tim Burton what he would need to film his show that says it's in Vermont, but it's in Romania, here?
Yeah.
And did he just film the second Beetlejuice movie here because the first one was filmed here? Like, is it just too hard for people, even who love our state and love the aesthetic of our state, to even sort of figure out how to navigate or have the infrastructure they need, the housing? Like, we need to know, the barrier.
So it's for large production studio-based projects like that, Tim Burton filmed the second Beetlejuice here because he loves Vermont.
Right,
And I love that.
And he's filming his other show
yeah, he's filming another
with
one.
Vermont license plates in another country.
Exactly. There's another film that a Vermont filmmaker and artist who is a dear friend of mine who lives in California. He is working on a show that is going to be set in Vermont, and the production company just said no, there's not tax incentives there, and that's where I think we will never be competitive with that. I mean, I think that Montreal or Quebec pays you to film there; they'll cover the full cost of your salary. Massachusetts, yeah. And those are not, I don't think those should be our focus areas, because they're not, if they come here, great, we want them to, but they're probably not, and we're not going to be competitive. But what we can do is build kind of the other side of digital media in Vermont or the whole world, right? The pieces that Senator Clarkson mentioned, the editing piece, the working here, smaller scale films. The idea of using this as I guess I need to have a better metaphor than pushing them over the cliff, but the people who want to work here are ready. We just need to make it like a little bit easier to do it. And that is kind of our first step that we're suggesting, is how do we make it just a little bit easier to see what our next step should be.
So exciting. I think this is an exciting opportunity, and this committee can really help support and advocate for this. So
I'm going to go to Alex to talk about film.
Okay.
So just in the keeping with our film, Alex is going to explain their process and the film that they just worked on, and kind of what it's like to be a filmmaker. And
Great. Alex, welcome. Come introduce yourself, and then we're going to hear from Jody and Barry.
All right.
Yeah, Susan has the slide deck.
I'll do your slides. Yeah, I'm all ready to go. I'm ready when you are.
Alex, welcome.
ready to-
Introduce yourself.
Yes.
You heard who we are.
Yes, hi, everybody. Thanks for having us all here. My name's Alex Showerman. I live in Waterbury. I am a filmmaker, a professional athlete, and then also it's a cool combination of both my hats today. I'm also the trails director for the Waterbury area.
Oh
Trails
my
Alliance.
God, and it's, you're perfect.
I know. I was like, what? This is
It's
great.
like Alex's day at the state house.
Yeah, pretty much. Also, we were talking about this right before coming in. I am also a second generation creative. My mom she ran a small opera company. She was a voice teacher and a watercolorist and based here in Vermont.
What opera company?
Through the Opera Glass.
Oh, yeah.
So her focus was bringing opera to like schools and community events and kind of making opera more approachable. So it kind of feels very cool to be here and advocating for the arts. I'm growing up with her as my mom. So thank you. So as far as my film and kind of what I do, so we recently filmed, in 2023, we filmed the project called Coming Home. It was a short adventure film. Largely the focus and goal was, my focus is adventure filmmaking. So there's kind of this narrative of, in order to find adventure, you have to go west, right? And I think like a lot of people, it's like you grow up on the east and you go west. So
Sorry, were you the director?
I was
Or the
director,
producer?
and co-director, co-producer, and subject. So essentially, as a professional athlete, spent time out west, did events with like Red Bull, and a few other really cool events, and made this really incredible group of friends who are like some of the top athletes on the planet. One was Hannah Bergman, who's a Red Bull athlete, and one was Brooklyn Bell, who was the first Black woman to film a heli ski segment in Alaska. And the film was kind of reversing that trend of you have to go west. It's called Coming Home. So it's about actually coming back to Vermont, bringing my West Coast based friends to Vermont and doing a road trip through to all my favorite riding places. And then it culminated in throwing a 2-day women's free ride event at Killington, free ride mountain biking, that actually Carrie was at.
Was Carrie participating or painting?
She was participating. Yeah. And kind of the goal with that was to help bring more women into the sport of free ride mountain biking. So it was a really cool opportunity for like local riders like Carrie to get to like connect with and ride with like Hannah Bergman and Brooklyn and myself and like learn from these really incredible athletes. Our focus for the film was really kind of showcasing how incredible Vermont is, with a strong narrative behind it. So we targeted it for film festivals, adventure film fests. We got it into Mountain Film and Telluride, which is one of the premier adventure film fests. We also got it into No Man's Land Film Fest and showed the world premiere was actually the flagship show in Denver. We actually had 3 showings in Denver across 2024. We won most inspiring film at that, and then we won best storytelling at IF3, which was an adventure film festival up in Quebec. And we also showed as far away as British Columbia. We were part of a film fest in Bellingham, Washington, and I actually just got a request for a screening in the UK. So we showed all over North America. I think as far as kind of the discussion about like the film and the impact, I think one of the things that was really cool was I got to travel around to a lot of the screenings. I went to 3 screenings in Colorado, screening in Washington State, and a screening up in Quebec I attended. And I think a really cool story that's relevant for this committee is actually our host when we were on the main stage at one of the main stages at Mountain Film was like wearing a Prohibition Pig t-shirt under his formal attire, and he's like, look at what I wore, and he like gave like Vermont and Waterbury like a shout out on the stage at Mountain Film and how much he loved Vermont. And I think 2 things I love was the feedback we got was, first, people were like, oh my God, I want to try mountain biking. That looks so fun. And then the next immediate was, oh my God, I want to check out Vermont. That place looks awesome. So I think,
So may I just ask you, what did the film cost? And
Yeah.
you shot it all in Vermont.
Yeah.
And give us sort of an impression of how that and what we could do to help in
Yes.
that arena.
I definitely will say it was a challenge. We wound up
To your budget?
budget. Yeah, we were 50K was how much it cost. I should have been 70, to be honest. Neither myself or my co-producer, co-director, Katie Lozanich, who's an incredibly talented creative who lives down just over the border in Western Mass. We really weren't able to pay ourselves. So it's a really substantial lift.
And how did you raise that money?
So we were really fortunate. Vemba actually got a grant from tourism for 20K. The rest of the money came from brand support. So we had Smart Wool, Pivot Cycles.
So grants from businesses.
Yeah, it was like sponsored, like basically like they wanted their logo on it and then like tasteful product placement. So yeah, Smart Wool, Pivot were two of our big sponsors. And then we had a couple smaller sponsors from Vermont. Lawson's Finest Liquids was a supporter. And then also Skeeta was a supporter, and we actually did a collab print with them for the film. So that was where our funding largely came from. It's interesting hearing about kind of the discussions and programs that you host. I think a lot of that stuff would have been really helpful as a filmmaker. I think that what you mentioned of like kind of figuring it out on your own was definitely a big challenge. I think being able to like be connected with like a film office who could like have helped guided us to more funding opportunities, more resources, the back end business support. I think that would have been immensely helpful. I think one of the, like speaking honestly, I think one of the challenging things was this film. We got a really positive response on all these awards toward North America. As a filmmaker, I've been like, would I do it again? And the answer is like right now, no, because it was just so hard financially to make it like viable. So it's this really incredible thing that I think brought Vermont to all over North America, but then very hard personally to make it a financially viable endeavor. So that's had me kind of weighing like, do I want to do it again? And the answer is like right now, no.
Did you train as a filmmaker?
So I've always been, my background is in media. I've done communications work for a long time. Our co-director and co-producer, she came up through Teton Gravity Research, which is a really incredible action sports media house out of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And then she also had produced one of the or it wasn't like the first, but one of the first all-female led ski films, Nexus. That was like a $200,000 production. And that was filmed all over North America. So she had that experience. And then we also brought in some really incredible filmmaker creatives. Our editor was Jackson Hole based, Charlotte Purcell. And our DP was Boulder, Colorado based. He actually had Vermont ties, so he was like really excited to come out and do the project.
So the things that we're talking about here in terms of a beginning, sort of getting our toe back into the film world and media world, you would support.
Yes.
Great.
What gave us like the green light, like, okay, let's move forward was when we got the grant. It was a $20,000 grant from tourism through Vemba. They handled all the financials on that. That was sort of like, okay, we have funding in hand. And then that brought the credibility to go to the brands and ask for more funds. But like, it still kind of was on me and Katie to shoulder that burden of...
That is true for every filmmaker.
Oh, yeah.
That is not different from every filmmaker in the country.
No. And I'm not complaining about it. But I think like having a dedicated, like, had we got that funding with state funds, right? Being connected to an office
Would have been great.
That's like, there to support and make sure it's a success, and be like, oh, we've got, all of these incredible, like, oh, have you thought about this, this grant project or this grant program that would be really beneficial, or, let me connect you with this. Kind of to give a comparative is right now with WADA, we're working on developing a new trail network in Moortown. And, we've been connected with like the CVRPC, the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, and they're kind of like helping guide us to like the great grant programs. And, oh, really? Oh, cool. And like making connections to like the Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation. And like, we just got plugged in with like the Ready program. So like having that like point of contact that's been able to like help us navigate the steps and be that connector. Like I think something like that in film would have been just incredible. So it was a little less of the figuring it out and more of like, okay, cool, here's all of the resources. Now let's just go after it and get it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I think we're going to pivot to Jody, but Randy,
I was going to ask though, is as far as this group organization, who's going to run it? Who's going to be in charge?
So the proposal is for the funding to go through the Vermont Arts Council, and then we're partnering with Vermont Production Collective, who already have the contacts. They're doing a lot of this work. So they will be kind of acting as the film office.
They're at Champlain College.
They are an independent nonprofit that we've partnered with and supported in the past, but they would be overseen by the Arts Council.
Well, one of the things that I learned from the work that we did in backgrounding, if you look talking to other states, seeing what other states have done, and the thing that struck me as the most important of all was having the right person in charge of
Absolutely.
it, and having someone in charge of it as opposed to someone being just someone who answers the phone and looks at directions. That
Exactly,
did not
yeah.
work in other states.
Jody.
So that just
And that's why the Production Collective is a good partner, because they are the film professionals in the state already. So, no one, it would be limitedly useful if you talk to me, but they are the people who you would talk to.
Right. And I will have to say that the film commission was most successful when we had the first executive director who was a film person and a with on locations, had been a professional location
Exactly. Yeah.
before, and she made it work. And the minute we didn't have somebody who was embedded in the film industry and knew what they were doing, we failed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are you
I
able
was
to
gonna
send
leave-
us your film?
I can send it, and if I could
Okay.
leave one other,
Oh, you found it?
YouTube.
yeah. If I can leave like with one parting thing is I think don't sleep on the adventure film making industry. I think, a lot of focus and glam can be drawn at Hollywood, and as we mentioned, we've got some big challenges with Quebec and surrounding states already well incentivizing. The adventure film community, I think is, that can tie really well with attracting people to Vermont, creating kind of the mythology of Vermont and spreading, sharing our culture and how incredible the state is more broadly. But it's also, I think, an area that's not well supported. And I think could be a really powerful opportunity to both tell the Vermont story to the broader North American and global audience, and also find a place where there's not as much support.
Right.
So,
And well begun quite honestly, by Warren Miller, who did the greatest
Yes.
films, and they were begun here.
yes.
So on
Anyway,
that happy pivot,
yeah.
we're going to
Thank
move
you.
to Jody.
Thank you, everybody.
Alex, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
This is just great.
Do you want me?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm gonna set up Jody. I'm gonna set up
And I
Jody.
brought those, they're just to give an overview of what
Oh.
Mount does.
Well, and also you were founded by one of our greatest filmmakers here in Vermont,
You still
Dave
work,
Craven and Bess O'Brien.
you still work with JMS every day. We have
Yeah.
a production tonight, the 2 trains running.
Yes, I know you do. I look with your emails are enticing.
When I left today, we had the tractor trailer unable to back in to the venue, so we had our
With the set.
student crew running stuff from the tractor trailer through a door where we took out the centerpiece at Fort Hall.
Oh, yeah. That had the set.
Yeah, so this is a Emmy production, and that's, Catamount brings world-class arts to the Northeast Kingdom. What I would say is, I've been there since 2008. Our focus strategically has been to integrate into the community at all levels across all sectors. The other job that I have is to run the Vermont Leadership Institute at the Sonoma Center for Government. And this whole idea of systems thinking, we've really brought it to bear as we've looked at how arts and culture can be brought into every single moment of daily life in the Northeast Kingdom. To do that, we partner constantly, and we partner with across businesses, across sectors. And 3-4 years ago, as far as 5 years back, we started in the Northeast Kingdom to really start feeling the housing crunch. And that's what I'm here today to talk about, because we started conversations then. We were hearing it from our own staff and the artist community, but we were also hearing it from our partners. During COVID, the traveling nurses were coming in, we didn't have any place to put them. There was no housing. The hospital, and if you probably heard from Sean Tester in Northern Vermont Regional Hospital, but they have just a dramatic need for housing that is directly causing a staffing shortage at the hospital of 70 to 80 people in the hospital. Similar with Wideman has, $44 million investment that's coming. They can't find people to work.
Chuck, we hear you. Introduce yourself.
Oh, Jody Creed, Executive Director at Catamount Film and Arts, and Director of the Vermont Leadership Institute, and also have been a part of the Creative Network since its inception with the legislature in 2016.
And I think when we first did the Vermont Creative Economy Report in 2009, we were involved.
We were.
With Alex Aldrich.
Yes, worked with Alex for a long time.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this stuff for a long time. And prior to doing this, had a decade in the corporate world and had a decade running entrepreneurially running private businesses. So come at this from an economic community development standpoint. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to be here with you. Back to housing. We saw that issue. We started working with our partners at that point to identify where could arts and culture play a role in that solution. We found a partner in those conversations who was the Northern Forest Center. Are you all familiar with the Northern Forest Center?
Yeah.
And I'm going to do a brief overview. The Northern Forest Center is focused on the region that goes across from Maine
To the Adirondacks.
all the way across the Adirondacks, the largest forest actually in the United States, that has been going through huge transition, both in terms of the workforce because of the loss of paper mills and the issues that we are facing economically and have been for the last couple of decades. Also, just the dramatic changes that climate change is having on those regions and how they're having to tweak their approach to what those communities can do to adapt in those circumstances. And so they have a presence in the Northeast Kingdom because we have a lot of forest in Caledonia, Essex, Orleans County. And we've been working with them for a long time on things like marketing those regions, working with our recreation who are here today with us, our recreation partners. And one of their focuses is housing. And they've been doing housing projects across the entire region from, again, Maine over through New York, through the Northern Forest. And they're doing it through a really unique strategy. And I don't know, do I do this?
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so that's the region. There you go. Just to give you a visual. And then, their specific focus is this kind of mid-range housing with middle market focused at the businesses that exist in those communities, in those rural areas across the Northern Forest. And the way that they do this is they work with the local community to identify partners, and they work to build a funding stack that is driven through philanthropy, that is driven through state, local, regional partners to create what is actually an economical and sustainable housing model that they can bring into these rural communities where private developers are not really interested in. And it's been pretty phenomenal. And the project that we're going to talk about specifically is in St. Johnsbury, where we've taken a building that's very similar. Our art center was built in 1912, the Catamount. Oh, did I go the wrong? No, those are other housing projects. There we go. And so 560 Railroad Street is the name of the project. The state has actually invested in it. Michael Pichek as treasurer and the 10% to Vermont put $500,000 into this project. There's been investments through ACCD. There's been investments through the Environmental Commission. There's been investments regionally through NVDA. There's over 30 private funders. There's about 20 philanthropic organizations, and they've come together to create a funding stack to be able to transform this building that was built in 1909 as the Armory in St. Johnsbury. It served as an armory for a long time, then became a dance hall. And was the dance hall in town, and then it became dilapidated and kind of just disappeared. They bought the building actually for about $150,000.
Who's that?
The Northern Forest Center. And so the Northern Florida Center has since then, over the past 3 years, and we've been a part of this working with them, have invested $5.9 million through that funding stack. And we've been a big part of that. And if Northern Florida Center was here, they were supposed to be here to talk. I'm doing some of the slides for them.
It's okay.
But if they were here, I think they would tell you that the ability to bring that funding stack together, the arts were a critical part of it because we committed early. We put an art studio on the front commercial space. It's tied to one of the residential units so that we're going to have an artist in residence who comes in, lives in the unit for 3 months at a time, works in the studio and works in our local schools, our community. And then we put public art as a feature of the building so that within so this is the studio, by the way, that's a picture, a rendering of it, but that's the actual construction there. This is the outside. You see there's a mural and on the front, there's a pedestal and public art. And so the building itself is going to be a work of public art that's going to be constantly changing and vibrant based on the work that's being done in the studio. So it creates this middle market housing that is actually really unique and different than anything else in terms of the fact that it is just changing all the time, the building itself.
And how many housing units?
So there's 9 units in it. They're 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. They just went on to the market. They expect to have them all rented by April. They're anywhere from $1,900 for the 2-bedroom to, I think,
To the rental.
the rental units. Yeah, the cost per month is $1,900 for a 2-bedroom to $2,600 for a 3-bedroom. They're beautiful. And I mean, from the standpoint of the construction, they repurposed 10,000 square feet of the original hardwood floors that were in there. All of the other wood products from in the building were sourced through lumber production companies in the Northern Forest, many of them within 60 miles. All of the contractors who worked on this project were from within that 60-mile radius. So when you think of the $5.9 million investment that was made, all of that money came back into our local economy. And if you think of it in terms of a turnover, 2.5 times perhaps the economic impact from this project alone and the construction of it is probably in the range of $10 to $12 million, I would say. And then you take that and you look at what that's going to mean over time to these different businesses. And then the fact that the arts are a critical part of that. And it's going to give back to our local downtown, to our local schools. So I just wanted to, I came here today because I think it's really important as we think about the creative sector, the work that our artists are doing are at the core of that. But I think we should also look at that through the lens of the impact that our artists are having in our arts organizations on every single sector that we have in this state. So I could sit here and have the same conversation with you about manufacturing. I could sit here and have the same conversation with you about retail, about healthcare, about mental health. And as we have these conversations, we should be looking at a way that we can bring the creative sector to bear as one of those partners. And the return on investment is really high with the creative sector. You look at the dollars in and what we bring back, it's phenomenal in terms of that investment. So that's what I wanted to tell you today.
And you know what? We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to just give one of our artists who had housing in Rutland. In case of nothing, is it quick?
Just hoping that we connect the dot to artist housing.
Yeah,
You know,
we also need
that
artist
who
housing.
can often revitalize the community,
Absolutely.
but love all of it.
And
Love turning up.
And we can credit artists for revitalizing huge sectors of New York City as they move.
Baltimore.
Everywhere. Buffalo.
Sorry, Buffalo.
Very.
Very.
Joey, thank
Down.
Susan, both these presentations are on our website.
Yep.
So we have both of these on our agenda. Carrie Pell, we're sorry to give you 5 minutes,
No
but
problem.
and then we
I
have
can
a
talk
meeting.
fast.
So I apologize,
No
but
problem.
as an artist whose work is represented above me, go for it. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carrie Pill. I grew up in Northern New York. I went to college in Green Mountain College in 2000. And ever since, Vermont has become my home. It's ever since I've been selling my work here. I started small with craft fairs, and then upon graduation, worked in galleries and sold my work privately. And now I sell most of my work on my website and at the Brandon Artist Guild, which is a wonderful art community in Brandon. And the last 2 ski seasons, I have challenged myself to ski and paint all of the Vermont ski areas. I did that in partnership with the Vermont Department of Tourism and also with backing from the outdoor brand Stio. And I also donated a portion of my profits to Vermont Adaptive because I think what they do is awesome. And they were here today too. So perfect day for me to be here.
Founded by a colleague of ours, Jim Hutchinson.
Yes, yes. So a little background on me. I grew up with also artists in my family. My grandparents, my mother was
An amazing.
folk artist, yes, who Allison knew. So I would go to craft fairs with her and help her out. And I saw that growing up. And I think that was very important for me to see that. I was able to have contact with Woody Jackson. I had all these artists that I could look up to and see working as professionals and actually making it work as their livelihood. And after graduating college, working at the Woodstock Gallery, I got to meet Sabra Fields and a bunch of other prominent Vermont artists, important Vermont artists. And seeing them make that work was so important to me. And I've noticed that when I'm out on the ski trails and I'm painting at these ski mountains, I'm seeing all these little kids gathering around. And I see that full circle. And it's just really important to me to be out in the public. And also I just love the interaction and the challenge of painting from life.
Particularly when it's cold.
Yeah, you gotta have the right gear, and that's where Stio stepped in with that. Also, Ski Vermont was a huge supporter of my project. So one of my big breaks was that I had Killington TV needed a short film about a local artist. So Corey Potter worked with me and he made a short film. It's about 3 minutes long. It's called The Art of Carrie Pill. That's on YouTube. You can check it out. It's very well done. And I was able to use that to pitch my project to Ski Vermont, to Vermont Department of Tourism. And they were able to see my story and what I was all about. And moving forward, I still work with local photographers and filmmakers to help tell my story. I think it's really important to tell the story behind the work. And that's helped me sell my work all over the US and Canada. I think that visual artists can be, I feel very much like almost a living postcard for our state.
You are a living.
I just love celebrating
that
mountains
idea.
and skiing, and I just love that I have work in Hawaii and Washington State and all over and up in Canada, and I think it's really
And in
important.
Woodstock.
Yes, and
In
it's
my
so true. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say, unless there's any questions.
And you're making a living as an artist
Yes.
in Vermont, living in Rutland.
Yes, I don't want to share my full income with you, but I had a very good month last year that I'm very proud of. I had a $15,000 month in January last year, and I thought that was pretty cool. So,
Well, we're thrilled
Is
to
it
do it.
artwork posters, like
it's oil paintings and prints of
So you
all the
can- you can
Vermont
buy
ski
prints
area
as well?
Mhm.
She was selling them upstairs.
Oh,
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yes, I don't
And-
have to have my cards. as
Oh,
well.
I did actually kind of see that, but it was a bit
Yeah, yeah,
overwhelming
yeah.
upstairs.
She had a little easel.
Yeah.
that she
Thank you
uses.
so
Right,
much.
that was very cool.
Thank you, Carmen. Sorry, ran over cards.
Thank you.